guys, this is a new episode of Tim's Two Cents, the podcast where I try to go through every or whatever ideology I pick that week. Eventually we're going to get there and we're going to cover every single one of them eventually, but I can only do one at a time. I guess I could just do one full podcast where I just explained everything that would probably just boil down to nobody has it right, try to figure shit out on yourself. There, you're done. You figured out life now. But no, I'm trying to go through all different kinds of belief systems, ideologies, pick out of those things what is the most positive aspects of them, what is the most helpful for living your life, for living, for I guess succeeding, it's not succeeding because what are you doing? You're listening to a podcast. How much can that really help you? But to try to like understand yourself, I guess, better understand where other people are coming from whenever they say that they believe in this certain ideology, at least the best I can. And also then try to make evident that a lot of these things do have problems. A lot of them have certain parts of the ideology, certain tenets that are not really true in fact, but are normally just a dogmatic, just I'm going to listen to this because I've been told that this is okay and that this has to be believed so that I can then get all the good parts of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that and a lot of different ideologies where you have to believe something that is either glaringly false or at least just maybe you would hope that it's true, but it's not. And then you have to take that. And if you are like a staunch follower or I guess you call it like a party line, like a hardcore believer in that ideology, you have to just take those as kind of an accepted thing and just kind of shut off the part of your brain that then questions if maybe that's true or not. And instead, we're going to try to find, like I said, the good stuff and everything, and then also the bad stuff and everything, so that you are at least aware, and it helps me to become more aware of things that I am looking at and trying to apply to myself and see where the kind of useless chaff comes from in a lot of those things where it is just let's just follow this for no particular reason other than it's attached to some good ideas. But that's basically what I do here. It's just me talking into a microphone. That brings me to, if you're hearing this, you most likely heard about this or have been introduced to this through You, Me, and BTC, which is a podcast I do with Daniel Brown and Zach Vole. It's cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and a lot of libertarian stuff in there. That is what I've done for the past 3 years with them. We started branching out. But that if you like having multiple different people in a discussion, if you like having guests, if you'd rather be more focused on cryptocurrency, if you'd rather be more focused on kind of news style stuff, that is definitely where you want to check out. Or just, even if you don't look at that, at least check it out, see if you like it. But we do a live show every single Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. We can get in the chat box, tell us what you want to talk about there, tell us about what you think about what we're talking about, tell us about if you want us to argue with you. We will argue with people on the show. We've done it before. We will shame you. Daniel Brown will take his clothes off for you if you name the correct price. Zach and I are yet not given up. We have not yet turned to cam whoring as a way to make our living, but who knows? The future is always open, guys. But if you like that, if you rather listen to a live show, if you like any kind of live show, check us out. It's always fun to just hang out with people there and get instant feedback. Get me on this if you have any issues with the show, if you like the show, if you have an ideology you want me to talk about. Get me on Baker's Dozen 93 on Twitter, and I'll probably respond on there more likely than I will respond to a YouTube comment. You can also do that. You can comment on Spreaker. You can comment on any of the YouTube videos that are put up. I'll most likely see those, but it's a lot easier to get to me on Twitter if you do notice it. So that's Baker's Dozen 93. And also on You, Me, and BTC, there's Zach Vole. He does another podcast on Tuesdays. This one normally comes out on Mondays. His podcast will come out on Tuesdays. It's called The Coin Pod. Zach does interviews. He does interviews and it's very crypto-centric. So, if you're interested in stuff like that, check them out because, he does a real good job with that. He always has good guests on. If you like a conversation in your podcast, you like to hear two people talking back and forth, if you want to hear interviews, that's definitely something to check out. So check out Zach's with his Coin Pod. Give him a follow. Hit him up on Twitter. I think it's at Zach Vol. You'll be able to find it someplace on this website if you found me. So I believe in you guys. But I guess going to what I want to talk about this week, and this is something that plenty of people have heard of it. I think I've heard of it for a while, pretty much as long as I can remember. It's a lot of these older styles or older, or any ideology kind of does come out of its time. Wherein what I mean by that is time period that it's in is then influences what the words people use, what even the word of the ideology means, and how the tenets of that and tenets of ideology shift as cultures shift. And I've talked about that before, but this week I want to talk about Stoicism, which is basic definition is, and I'll try to dumb it down a little bit further on, but it's basically that virtue and what is the chief end of man, as they would put it in like a biblical thing, or the church, I forget what the book was. Growing up, I always had this, besides just the church that I went to in the Sunday school and then the Christian church I went through pretty much throughout my entire schooling was done at a small private school, not even a particularly wealthy private school. If maybe I would have turned out better if this was like a private school, like how that makes what that makes most people think of, like where people go through and then become investment bankers like right out of college. This was like a private school in the sense that people send their kids there so that they don't go and do drugs with other riffraff and fuck it like 16 and any of this stuff. It's more of like what's the word I'm thinking of? Like a quarantine, I guess, for kids more than anything. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to send you here because you're going to get the best education possible. It's, we're going to send you here because this keeps you away from all the bad stuff, and they teach you creationism instead of evolution and stuff like that. But besides all that, there was this book it had to do with, because it was a very hardcore Presbyterianism, and there was a book of church order, or like questions. It was the Westminster the Westminster Catechism of Faith, or Confession of Faith, something like that. But it had multiple questions in it, and to become a member of a church, the elders would ask you questions. I remember them asking me these questions, but one of the first questions, if not the first one, was, what is the chief end of man? In their book, it's to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. I bring that up only to say that Stoicism seems to be, especially in the the old form of it, in the tradition of it, is Stoicism is you enjoy life and you take life kind of as it comes, but you take life and God and the world and fate are kind of replaced for what in the Westminster Confession of Faith they would put as the traditional Judeo-Christian Abrahamic God. In Stoicism, it's just kind of fate and life in the world, where you live your life, you live according to nature, you live according to what is happening around you, and you live in the most peaceful way with that possible. What that means can mean plenty of different things, but generally, a simpler explanation of what Stoicism is, it's just the endurance of pain or hardship without a display of feelings or a complaint about it. It's accepting that life will be awful sometimes, and even sometimes that's good to have a hard life, but to restrain yourself, to restrain your emotional responses to that, but not just emotional responses to bad things happening, just emotional responses to like envy or lust, and to not give yourself over to emotional explosions, responses to things, and to live in this kind of this steady current of just acceptance, but not in a just, oh, well, I guess we just have to deal with this because, but in a, well, this is life, this is how I have to live because I'm not going to be able to change this. They would normally divide things. There'd be a very black and white of, these are things I can change, these are things I cannot. And the things that you cannot, you kind of just have to live with. The things that you can change, you do your best to control them, because then that will help you to lead a virtuous life. And what they meant by a virtuous life was to live according to nature, to order. And a lot of that had to do with Stoics looked at people and looked at mankind as this like cosmopolitan idea of, we're all one, we're all in this together, we all are one great connection of brothers and sisters, and we should live as such because that is how nature would be. Deers, other animals don't just screw each other over on purpose. It happens sometimes, but they don't go out of their way to cheat each other. They will, generally there's a kind of peace between and amongst a species of things. Another one of their, like, what man's life is for and what the highest achievement in life is for, is that you acquire the knowledge to then help you be stoic in the face of terrible things happening, to help you understand that, well, sometimes like pain is going to happen. People around you are going to die. You're going to get sick. You're going to get injured. You're going to have financial problems. You're going to have any number of things go wrong in your life. And the best way to meet those things is to just go, hey, it happened. I can't change that it happened. I can maybe change some things to make my experience better, but getting angry, screaming at the world, going on just drowning yourself in drugs, or trying to kill the pain with any number of things that people try to mask things in their life with, that's not useless, but almost it's kind of shying away from what fate is, from what destiny is. And instead of doing that, we should try to live in harmony with what happens and just accept it. Just live in a way that you can, every single day is yours to use use. Every single day is yours to experience. And every single day is a day for you to achieve something better. But if it doesn't happen, if things go wrong, then, well, I mean, you can't really, there's nothing to scream at. You can't get angry at God, or as they would say, the universe, because your life isn't easy, because your life isn't the way you thought it was going to be, because that is nothing. Your expectation for what life should be, your expectation for how people should treat you, is nothing. There's nothing to say that is a logical way of looking at the world, to expect every single other person to have your same standard of whatever. There's no logical reason to expect other people to treat you correctly or to treat you in a respectful way. And instead of getting angry, and instead of freaking out about that and causing yourself more harm through doing that, you should instead try to keep yourself level, try to keep yourself logical. Think like, I never watched enough Star Trek, so I don't know how well this really works, but the whole, like, the Vulcan thing of don't be emotional, Don't give yourself over to emotion. Don't let emotions... Now, obviously, you have to experience emotion. And I was looking at different stuff, and there's some different modern interpretations of what Stoicism is. Because the oldest forms of Stoicism was there was one or the other. You were either a sage, a person who is completely level, completely accepting of the world, or you were someone given over to those emotions. Maybe the sage didn't even experience them at this point because they had so ingrained logic and reason. But you have to experience the emotions. If we're talking about like a modern sense, you have to experience the emotions. We're gonna feel the bad things. We're gonna feel sad. We're gonna feel heartbroken. We're gonna feel angry. We're gonna feel rage even. But don't let that emotion cloud your logic and cloud your decision making in that moment to where you're most likely just going to make things worse, either on other people or especially on yourself. And don't let yourself get dragged into, because they would look at giving yourself over to your emotions as becoming less than human. The most important thing in life was to ascend to your greatest human ability, your greatest human potential, and the only thing that emotions can do is drag you down beneath that to where you are just given over to whatever emotions, whatever whims you have at that moment of how someone else has affected your life and how someone else can then make you feel a certain way and then make your decisions against that. So Stoics would say that you should, besides just not giving into emotion and not letting yourself feel bad whenever you had misfortune befall you, but also to harden yourself preemptively against those, almost like a vaccine, to maybe not live in comfort all the time, to not take every single little comfort given to you. Maybe you have the possibility to live at the perfect, I don't know, it is a stupid example, but the perfect temperature in your house at all times. Maybe not do that. Maybe get used to being uncomfortable in your life, so then whenever you are forced to be uncomfortable, it's not as much of a shock to you, and then you won't be so overridden by or overrun by your emotions in that moment, because you can go, oh well, I've dealt with this before. I've been uncomfortable before. I've hurt before. I've been hurt before, so I don't have to. This is not my first time. This is not the first experience I've had with misfortune or hardship, so I'm more able to deal with the situation logically and reasoning. What they're talking about with living according to nature, I believe, I couldn't exactly figure out what that meant, and that has nature and living to nature has a lot of different ideologies posit that, and how because a lot of them call to nature as a reason for why they're correct. They would say, well, see, I mean, you're naturally supposed to do this, and whatever that means, natural law, the liberty for each person. We call these things like natural, when a lot of times we don't necessarily know what that means. It doesn't really mean probably what most people think it means. It's more just a buzzword. It's a way to say, I'm right because this is natural. What I'm doing is natural. What you're doing is not natural. So therefore it's against nature. Speaking of knowledge, where they would talk about what I was saying before about gaining knowledge is the highest point of man. The knowledge, I think I already said that knowledge would help you understand that nature is something that the knowledge to understand what nature means and what nature means for how you should act. And I do understand a lot of what is that. I'm very, I prefer Stoicism over a lot of other things. I'm definitely sympathetic to that view. I'm sympathetic to the view that a lot of times the reason why people do make rash decisions and do make stupid decisions in certain situations are because they do not they've never experienced them before. They've never gotten to where they even think about those things. A lot of the Stoics talked about having almost like a meditation on death, on thinking about you dying sometime. And I've heard this is more of a modern idea, I think. I'm not quite sure about ancient, but I've definitely heard it mentioned by people who would probably call themselves modern day Stoics. Is it's whenever you get up in the morning, spend like 5 minutes just thinking about being dead, and just think about being gone. Think about that. Think about not being able to achieve things on this earth ever again. I mean, it doesn't matter if you believe in a heaven or hell or any kind of a life after this. Focus on not being able to achieve things in this life, not being able to experience things on this world, in this body, and focus on that as a way to, I guess, daily prepare yourself for the eventual reality that you will die, and that you have to do what you can or do what you want in the time that you are alive. And that can maybe help you to figure out what you want to do, what you're supposed to do, what nature, whatever that means again, is calling you to do. A lot of Stoicism is about, is it worth, like, is the emotional pain you're going to feel by giving yourself over to these emotions, and like, is that worth the little bit of maybe solace you get from being angry at somebody or being angry at God? Is it worth just like screaming out at the universe? What is that worth? What is it worth to bemoan anything that happens to you? Why not just, okay, fine, it happened, I'm just going to keep going. Maybe I can learn from this. Maybe I can learn that maybe I shouldn't do certain things. Maybe I shouldn't hang out with certain people. Maybe I shouldn't do whatever. But the emotional side of that is never going to help you in that. And I think that's mostly what they're getting at. Another thing that I do like from Stoicism is the idea that, and I don't know that this is necessarily particular to Stoicism. I know that when I've looked at stuff before, and then when I was looking at stuff before the podcast, it was mentioned a couple times, but it is that the best indication for someone's philosophy and how they live their life and how they truly organize their life is to look at how they live, look at how they act, look at how they react to things. Don't listen to what they say. Don't ever, and I think most of us would agree that that's true. I think a lot of people don't necessarily practice it then. Definitely not with how we look at politics. It seems like every single election, he says he does this, and it's, well, what does he do? No one really pays too much attention to that, because it's kind of hard to do that, because most people do just lie, especially the higher up you get in politics, the higher up you get in any social hierarchy. The way people get elected are not by having people look at their track records, it's by having people look at what they're saying at that moment. But even just with the people around you, the people you work with, your friends, don't take what they say as necessarily truthful. Not to say that they're lying to you, but don't take someone who tells you, oh, I live with however. Look at how they actually live. Does someone who espouses Christianity to you, to someone who espouses socialism to you, to someone who espouses any ideology to you, do they actually live like that? Do they live like they believe that? Do they live like that is the highest good? And it depends on what exactly ideology it is, because I have more of a problem with certain ideologies than I do with other ones, because certain ideologies do allow some leeway, but there are other ideologies, especially religious ones or like the hardcore political ones, where what you're espousing and the way you're espousing it and the way that you say you believe in it means that it should forever be in the forefront of your mind, and it should be forever informing your day-to-day life and informing how you spend your time, where you work, who you associate with, what activities you participate in. And you have to look at if people follow that, and if people actually restrain themselves from whatever, or then force themselves to do certain things that aren't the most enjoyable. Like if you are a constitutionalist is something, but if you're someone who believes in the virtue of democracy and the virtue of public rule like that, then they should be out there voting every single time, because they believe that that is the way to affect change. If it's somebody who's espousing Christianity, then they should be living each moment of their life like they're waiting for Christ to come again. They should be living their life, whatever ideology it is, they should be living their life like whatever ideology they believe in is true and is important and is the most important part of their life. Because a lot of people, and this may be a modern thing, this may be whatever, don't live like that. They spend a lot of time talking about it. They may even spend a lot of time writing. They may spend a lot of time espousing it. But in how they live their day-to-day life, a lot of people do not live in a way that is indicative of that. The way they live, if you saw them on the street, if you saw them at the gym, if you saw them at a restaurant, you wouldn't know that they believe this. Now, obviously, that could be obnoxious, but a lot of times I don't get why people who are hardcore into whatever ideology are then worried about being obnoxious. Because if you are hardcore into some of these things, you shouldn't worry about being obnoxious to somebody. If you're really into Christianity, and I remember hearing this before, there's even a passage in the Bible about how if you have curses or scorn heaped on you by people for the sake of Christ, for the sake of God, that will be a blessing for you in heaven. If you're hardcore into socialism, what do you care if somebody calls you an idiot online, or an idiot at your face, or whatever they call you whenever you bring it up, whenever you say, hey, maybe we should all just get together as a collective and share our things, and to each his own, however much he needs. None of this stuff should be something where you're like, well, I kind of believe in this, but you can, it's like, it doesn't really affect my day-to-day life, but I like to think about it in my head. But that was something I read looking at this stuff and looking at doing the podcast, and in the past was the Stoics focused on how you live your life, how your day-to-day goes, because besides it just being a representation of that particular ideology to the outside world, that also your day-to-day moods, your day-to-day actions, your day-to-day conversations do affect what you believe and what you do with your life. Habits and certain, like, anything that is a habit or what you would call like a character trait of somebody will affect how their life goes and will affect how they interact with other people a lot more than I think we give credit to stuff. We normally want to think that like a bad habit is something you can break, you can just get rid of. But like a habit is something that does come from someplace else. It does come from some other part of you, but it also then reinforces certain parts of you. So if you want to see what somebody actually believes and what somebody actually thinks about most of the time, look at what they're doing. Look at how they react to things. Look at how they react to hardship. Look at how they react to adversity. Look at how they react to anything, and you will see what they actually believe, because when you get down to it, what you believe and what you say is almost never the same thing. We all obviously want to, we look to and we aspire to live perfectly by our beliefs, but I don't know anybody that doesn't fall short sometimes. So you have to look at how, and this goes for yourself too, is like, look at how you're living your day-to-day life and look at how what that means. Are you living in a way that is indicative of whatever ideology you espouse or whatever ideology you think you believe in? Are you living in a way that would be in line with something like that? So that's the stuff that I do like as far as Stoicism. I like that. I think that as far as dealing with problems, dealing with issues in your life, dealing with mental problems, Stoicism seems to be good, seems to work for some people. It seems to help some people to, instead of trying to cover things with chemicals or another person, and what I meant by that is like you latch on to somebody else, or you use somebody for emotional comfort. Instead of giving in to your need for an emotional release or an emotional like spark for anything, don't give in to that emotional distress. Don't give in to that emotional response to things, and instead focus on living your life as, I guess, flat. I don't know if that would work, but like as evenly as possible. Keep yourself at a calm state. Be kind of zen at all times. Be focused on making yourself as used to things not going your way as possible. Focus yourself on accepting that things don't go your way, and accepting that isn't necessarily wrong, that isn't necessarily good, but it's what's happening now, so you do have to accept it. And if you can change it, do that. Change the habits that led you to that. Change who you're around that led you to that. But you can't have an emotional response to that, because in general, an emotional response is only going to make this worse. And then also an emotional response is debasing yourself to where you aren't using your reason or your logic and all the stuff that they would espouse as good. And so now I'm going to run an ad. Well, you'll hear Daniel's wonderful voice, and I'll come back, and I guess I'll try to argue against what I just said and why Stoicism isn't good.
Hey guys, today's show is brought to you by Chronologic.network. Chronologic is an Ethereum-based project that aims to solve time-related problems on the blockchain. Through Chronologic's 3 core products, the Ethereum alarm clock, debt smart contracts, and the day token minting mechanism, they solve the problems of payment scheduling, crypto loan time constraints, and unstable token launches. Find out more at Chronologic.network.
Alright, and we're back. Maybe you heard my pen click. Maybe I got that edited out. We'll see. But I'm going to talk about why Stoicism is wrong, why Stoicism isn't necessarily the best way to go through your life, and why Stoicism isn't all that logical sometimes. And I think starting out, it's because expecting most people to live logically, expecting even yourself to live logically and to be able to reason completely outside of emotion is something of a lost cause. I believe it's something of a worthless battle. You can't really ever get away from your emotions. You can't really ever conquer those. You can't, just because I don't know, maybe some people do. I've never even come close to a point in my life where I thought I could just be away from emotional stimuli just to not even feel them. Expecting people to live in a way that is reasonable is then you do have to suppose that anybody is reasonable, in that sense, that anybody is completely logical, that any of us have any kind of have any kind of a say on how we're going to act in any certain situation, or if that's presupposing a lot. I think that's presupposing a lot for yourself to believe that you even whenever you think you're acting logically, you're probably not. You probably still have some kind of emotional push behind that, some kind of an emotional catalyst to why you're doing that. We can't be completely objective because everything we see is subjective. Everything is subjected to our ability to take in everything. Everything is subjected to our mind and what has happened to us in the past, and what the thoughts we've had in the past, the actions that have been done to us in the past. Everything is subjected to that. Everything is subjected to just how kind of convoluted our minds become as we age and as we take in other ideologies or look at them. And it's something of a stretch to say that a lot of people, or even that most people, are able to live outside of emotion and outside of just letting emotions run your life and make your biggest decisions for you. It's kind of impossible, I would say. It's at least kind of vain, or not necessarily vain, but it's thinking a little bit too highly of yourself, I think, to just believe that you're going to live in an objective way whenever so many people don't, and whenever you have to understand that we do have certain, like, we all do certain things and we all think certain ways, not most of the time, not because it's the logical way to do it, but because of how we were raised, or like I said before, the people you've talked to, things that people have done to you, the way that the country you lived in, your siblings, all this different stuff gets in the way of actually living outside of an emotional response to things. So that's one of my biggest problems, is thinking that anyone is even capable of doing that, that anyone is capable of getting to the sage state of just being completely zen with stuff and just kind of flowing with life and understanding and having the knowledge, because it's not a knowledge thing. You can read all the books you want, you can look at all the posts online that you want about life and about how we aren't necessarily in control of most of our actions or most of our thoughts, but you're still going to, even while you're reading that, and even while you are trying to be as objective as you can, you're still going to be part of your mind. You can't take yourself out of your mind. You can't take yourself out of our self-centered focus of our life. If you could do that, you'd have like a hive mind. You have a bunch of people who lived for the group, and I guess that would be what a lot of Stoics would extol as like the next evolution of humanity, the great the aspiration of humanity is being the people who live as one group and one people. And you hear people talk about that we are the world, we are the children, we are all this bullshit that we make up, and we say how we want to live together and we want to focus on accepting and loving each other as this great amorphous blob of things. But then every popular culture representation of a thing like a hive mind is normally creates like disgust in people. It scares us, because as individuals, and as maybe it's mine, and then probably most of yours, it's a Western thing of the individual and of the individual above all else, the individual liberties. So maybe that's what it is. But we have an aversion to something where the individual kind of falls away and his individual image is stripped away, and instead he is just a part of a whole. So I don't like how we have this at the same time a at least we say, and again, this comes back to you have to look at what people do, not what we say. We say we want to, and oh no, we're all in this together, man. We're all brothers. We're all whatever. But that's not how we look at things. We like to bomb each other. We like to, just this past week, we bombed another country and killed its citizens, killed civilians for that country killing civilians. And we're all arguing together, but none of us are but people are defending that. People are defending, well, we needed to make a strike. We needed to make this great thing because it's going to be for peace. It's going to be for whatever. We needed to save those people from just becoming the amorphous blob of whatever Assad is supposed to be over in Syria, where we don't want them falling into the war machine or something like that over there. But we don't look at like truly what we use that as a pejorative term. We call North Koreans stupid for just all loving their leader and following and working whatever they do, and it's like, oh no, they're just all the same. It's just a bunch of robots. Like, that's a pejorative term. But then that would be the way to live as one, to live like the whole world, to live as brothers. So I do have a problem with that. I do also have a problem with whenever they talk about living by nature. I don't know what that means. I don't know what nature is. Part of the problem, like, as science is, the more high tech, the more intricate our ability to measure things going on in the world get, the more we go, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Like it used to be in the Bible, there's something about the sun rises, the sun set, the sun rises every day, and I don't know, that was kind of a butchering of it. It doesn't really make any sense. But back whenever Stoicism was getting started, it's like, hey, well, the sun rises every single day, and it never hasn't risen, so isn't nature ordered? Isn't nature great? But then when we look at, hey, there's other stars, there's other planets that have had suns, and then those suns just go out and they explode, and then there's just destruction. There's just nothing, and we're just not living in the time that's happening with our sun. What is nature? What is this order that most people talk about? This order that they would have extolled back then. The more we look at things, the more it's just not there. The more things don't work, the more problems we find in the world, the more clashing between different ecosystems we find, and how one species, if a species grows bigger than the other one, it's just feeding on the other one. That's how humans got so big. If you want to save the earth, then yeah, we probably have to get rid of people. But does that follow with does that follow with living your life and not responding to emotional misfortune, or just misfortune in general? Is that a nature thing? Is it nature telling us that we're too big? No, I don't see how that is. It's just, that's the way things work, is by one group feeds off the other one. One group takes from the other one. There's less order, I think, than what we used to think. Maybe again, that's just this kind of, we've got a screwed up modern world where we're not feeding off of animals that we raise. We're not killing our own meat. We're not even farming our own vegetables or grains. It's all just a factory thing. So maybe that's an issue, but I don't really see the order in all of that. I just see chaos in the world, and then humans. And the reason why we've risen so high is we were able to harness it and force it into a sort of order and force it into a regular thing. We were able to industrialize the world, and that's why our population exploded. That's why the standard of living is so much higher than it used to be. And that's what I see. I see humanity forcing order on the world, not the world and nature just giving order onto us. But who knows? Maybe, yeah, whatever. another problem I have with it is I don't think, and this has more to do with like the old tradition of Stoicism, where there's the sage, there's the person who's completely zen, the person who's completely outside of emotional. They're not affected by it. They don't give in to emotional outbursts or pleasure, or not emotional pleasure, but emotional just problems. They don't give into they don't let their emotions run them. They live by logic and reason alone. And there's the sages, and then there's one other group, and that is people who have no control over it and have they don't even try, most likely. They don't at least truly try. And also there's a dichotomy in events in the world and powers in the world, where one is what you can change, absolutely, what you can absolutely control, and what you cannot control at all. And I think in both of those, there's a middle, and I think most things would fall in the middle. There's very little in your life and very little in the world that you can absolutely control. A lot of things do go up to kind of luck, or whatever you want to call it. In chaos, there's always this kind of luck of the draw, where you can do all the right things, you can live the most healthy way, you can exercise all the time, you can not ever drink, you can eat all the right foods, but maybe you get cancer at 35, maybe you have a disease, maybe you whatever, where you can have some control over this, but there's not an absolute control. There's not a definite, you do this and this will never happen to you. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that in the world. There's nothing like that in anything. Even in our own man-created systems, we haven't found a way to force that much order into the world where you go, well, I checked all the boxes, now I get $100,000. There's ways to do that. There's ways to shift the odds of it happening in your favor, but there's no guaranteed success in anything, because, again, this goes back to, I don't see there being order. I see there being chaos, and anything where things good happen, it's because we've kind of forced it to happen. You kind of just, through whatever you want to call grit or determination, people force things to happen. People force good things into their lives, and they kind of like rip it out of the chaos. They don't take from the world and take from the great nature and the great nurture of nature and nurture don't have anything to do with, I just kind of use the two words together, but they just take sustenance from nature instead of having to force nature to give it to them. So I don't like this black and white dichotomy between you can control none of these things, or you can't control these things at all, and then you can control these things absolutely. And then I also don't like the dichotomy between the sage and the person who's completely given over their emotions. Most people are somewhere in between, where they struggle with certain ones. Maybe they struggle with depression, maybe they struggle with anger, maybe they struggle with any of these things where they can control certain parts of them, and that is, in them controlling other parts of them, their own lives, is a testament to their possibly being able to control their others, but they just don't. Maybe that's a little bit less than the dichotomy between things you can and can't control as far as happening to you, but I still don't see that. I still don't really buy that you can become completely logical and completely reasonable and completely objective just because emotions are always going to be there. They're always going to be knocking at the door to break it down and just kind of run amok in your head. And unless you're someone who is somehow capable of being hyper vigilant to that at all times, in the worst of situations, or even whenever you've just woken up and you're kind of just tired, or whenever you've worked a 10-hour day and then you come home, and then if you're it's anyone who, like somebody who be able to be hypervigilant all the time, I don't really see existing. Most people are somewhere in between, and that goes back to habits. It goes back to how you've lived your life before, how you've set up your life, what you are willing to endure before you just give yourself off to an emotional outburst. So, I mean, that was most of my thoughts, I think, on it. I had a few others that I couldn't really figure out exactly how to say about Stoicism. I'll try a little bit now. I don't like the just casting off of any kind of emotional response to things. I think sometimes that is, if there is any nature, then sometimes an emotional anger and emotional rage, sadness is nature, is the way that sometimes even is the best way to respond. Sometimes an emotional outburst is the correct way to show that whether if someone's doing you wrong or if someone's doing you right, that is the correct way to respond. And you shouldn't keep yourself from responding emotionally because you think that you'll somehow be logical or be more reasonable to them or something like that, because people are just going to kind of look at you as some kind of weird creep automaton, which again goes back to what I was talking about, where this idea of a one human group of people who are all together and we're all striving for the same thing doesn't really exist. And the people that give into that, the people who, if you are being logical in a situation, or you're not just giving yourself over to emotions, most people are going to look at you like you're a creep. Most people are going to look at you like, well, wait, why don't you ever get sad or angry, or why don't you ever complain? And that's another point, is where if you are just dealing with things in your life, if you're just dealing with a hardship, if someone's constantly doing something to you and you have other people around you and you don't ever say anything, then you're not going to get any help. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, or whatever that is. Sometimes, especially in the kind of modern world we live in, complaining and making a loud noise, and especially if you're able to play off of other people's emotions, is sometimes the best way to get what you want, is the best way to get attention for yourself, to get people to notice you, is to be an obnoxious, emotional asshole sometimes. And I've seen that in my life. I've seen other people do that, and I can't really deny that. But anyway, I don't really have any real more about that. If you think that I did anything wrong in this, if you had an emotional response to this episode, no. But if you want me to talk about anything in the future, if you want me to redo something, maybe tell me how I got something wrong, I could look back on it. I could do Stoicism, a look back, which wouldn't really make too much sense now, since it's only 8 episodes in. I never did say at the beginning, but this is episode 8, Stoicism. Not that it really helps now that I've put it here, but I'm only 8 episodes in, so I don't know how soon I'd be able to go back and do a re-look at certain things without it just kind of being pretentious. But if you have any praises, critiques for any of this stuff, please get me on Twitter. I'm at bakersdozen93. Tweet me, send me nice things, send Daniel money, tell Daniel that I'm your favorite person and that he should give me all the money. I know you guys are donating millions of dollars and millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin and Litecoin. He's just not giving Zach or me any, and make sure that he knows he should give me some of the Bitcoin so he can make me rich too, so then I can just do more podcasts. Because I mean, even if you don't like what I do, if you like what Zach does, if you like what Daniel, Zach, and I do, the more you donate, the more, even if it isn't just even just money, if it's attention, if it's retweets, if it's likes, that lets us do more stuff. That lets us put more shit out. That lets us focus more on that. We don't have to worry about, well, is anybody listening? Does anybody care? Does anybody want to take this in? If you like it, let us know so that we can have some, because like I was talking about, we are emotional. We are emotional creatures, and part of the reason why we're doing something, part of the reason I'm doing this podcast, no matter how much I want to tell myself it's not, is I like attention and I like people to like me. So if you do like it, let me know. If you don't, tell me, and I'll tell you probably to fuck off, but it'll at least help me to realize what I'm doing right and what I'm not doing right. And just let us know that you care, I guess. Let us know that you want to hear more, and we'll give it to you. But anyway, whatever it is, hope you guys have a good week. Hope you don't get too riled up by anybody. Don't let anybody run your life by making you hate them or by making you have an emotional response to them every time you see them, because you're in a prison then, and they are hurting you far worse they're hurting you inside your head far worse than they could ever do to you in real life. So just have a good week, guys. Love you, and tune in next week. Check out the Coin Pod and you, me, and BTC. Bye.